Hi, everyone. I'm Tony Bernardo, Dean of UCLA Anderson, and I'd like to welcome you to today's discussion with Amanda Renteria, CEO of Code for America, hosted by the centers at Anderson. We're very glad to have you join us. Our centers at Anderson act as a hub for leadership insights, faculty research, student and alumni engagement, and service to our communities and society. They operate in such areas as finance, real estate, entrepreneurship, technology, media and entertainment, marketing analytics, and global issues that transcend borders. Today's innovation conversation is part of a new series of discussions created by the centers, collaborating in an effort to share expertise, key lessons, and best practices across disciplines. We know that in the wake of the pandemic, there will be increased opportunities and challenges that will mean greater demands on leaders, businesses, and society. New innovation strategies must be assessed and utilized to ensure future success. This series will address the innovation imperatives of today and their implications for tomorrow. Today's discussion also highlights the critical role that technology can play in improving the provision of public sector services and in narrowing the gap between the private and public sectors in terms of the utilization and design of technology. It also underlines the increasingly interdisciplinary nature of leadership, including the need for business and government to work together on some of the world's toughest, most pressing issues. I hope you engage in this program, learn from it, and ultimately lead in a way that benefits you, your organizations, our communities, and society at large. Now I'd like to introduce Professor Terry Kramer, Faculty Director of UCLA Anderson's Easton Technology Management Center, and the moderator for today's program. Terry?
Hey, Tony, thank you. A big thank you, and thank you for your support on this broad theme about business and society, technology and society. This event that we're having today is a key part of a new course that we're offering today at the Easton Center on technology and society. And what this course really looks at is where can technology fundamentally help in areas of societal need, whether that be education or transportation or healthcare, and the juxtaposition of that service provision against what is a growing tech lash. And whether that be in areas like antitrust, data privacy, future of work, digital divide, and income divide. And through all of these discussions in the class and further on at UCLA Anderson, thinking about what is the role of leaders and CEOs as they think about a broader set of stakeholders. Now, today's session with Amanda, who's the CEO of Code for America, is going to specifically focus on how you can use technology for the benefit of the public sector. And I think that's what makes this especially interesting, timely, and unique. And for those of you that plan to enter the public sector or already have experience in the public sector, I think you're going to enjoy getting this latest look at technology. For those of you that are planning to transition, this will be an interesting opportunity to think about where you can apply technology. And for those of you that don't have any plans to go in the public sector, hopefully this will be an interesting look at the role of government and how government can operate better and deliver better outcomes. Now, a little bit about the Code for America. It's a non-partisan, non-political organization that was founded in 2009 to address the widening gap between the public and private sectors in the effective use of technology and design. The organization uses a lot of the principles and practices in the digital age to improve how government serves the public and how the public improves government. The Washington Post described Code for America as the technology world's equivalent of the Peace Corps or Teach for America. They bring fresh eyes with potential solutions. They deliver agile coding and software development skills and frequently offer new perspectives on the latest technology, something that's often missing in government IT programs. This capability is a win-win for public organizations that need help and for technologists that want to give back and contribute to a lower cost of government and the delivery of improved outcomes. Now, Code for America focuses on a variety of issues in public service, including criminal justice, the social safety net, and workforce development. And you'll see some interesting projects that they've worked on and executed. Clear My Record is a free online tool that helps people with eligible convictions navigate the complicated journey towards clearing their record. The technology helps government clear hundreds of thousands of records automatically by reading criminal history data and then determining eligibility for relief under the appropriate statute and producing necessary documentation for courts to update records. In the US today, 1 in 3 people have a criminal record that appears as on a routine background check. Even a minor criminal record can present a lifetime barrier in obtaining employment, housing, and education. Another project is Get Cal Fresh. This is an application that improves how government delivers CalFresh, which is food assistance to Californians in need. By using technology, they reduce the application time from 45 minutes to 8 minutes, significantly impacting the beneficiaries of the program. Nearly 2 million Californians who qualify for CalFresh are not receiving benefits because of a lengthy and confusing application process. And finally, Code for America has built the Brigade Network. It's a network of volunteer groups made up of community organizers, developers, and designers that are putting technology to work to help with local civic issues. There are now more than 80 brigades across 43 states in the US. Now, with all this background on Code for America, let me now introduce Amanda. She's got a fascinating background. She started out in financial services. She moved into education as a teacher in her small hometown community, and then finally spent the majority of her career in public service. She began her career working as a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs. Shortly after that, she moved back to her hometown in a low-income agricultural community in the Central California Valley to teach math and economics at Woodlake High School. She served also in many public service roles. She was a budget analyst for the city of San Jose, California. She's the first Latina chief of staff at the US Senate. She was a national political director for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign and chief of operations at the California Department of Justice. In addition to her policy work, she ran for Congress in 2014, winning the Democratic primary, and went from almost no name recognition to 78% name recognition in 12 months. She also ran for the governor of California in 2018, where she finished as the top 5 Democrat in a top 2 primary system after entering the race less than 120 days before the primary. And she holds a BA in economics, also in political science from Stanford, and an MBA from Harvard Business School. I can tell I've already embarrassed her massively, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to go through a very impressive background. Now, in terms of format, I'm going to ask Amanda a series of questions, and then we'll open it up to dialogue via Slido. So just go to slido.com and enter in the event code CODEFA. So CODEFA, Code for America. And we'll take as many of the upvoted questions as possible. So Amanda, a big welcome to you. It's a delight to have you here.
Well, thank you. It's a real honor to be with all of you. Really appreciated just the conversation. I appreciate the class. I don't appreciate hearing there might be some people in the audience, however, that don't want to enter into public service right now. So I'm here to try and convince you.
We love the support. Well, you have a little less than an hour to convince everybody here, and I bet you're going to do a very good job of that. Start out, Amanda, you've had a fascinating career and you've transcended multiple areas. You were in financial services and, obviously you've been in the public sector, you've been a teacher. Tell us how you made the transitions.
Yeah. So the through thread for it, for all of it for me is, I think it really starts where I grew up, and you mentioned it a little bit, which is in the Central Valley of California. It's actually the lowest income or poorest district in our state and among the 10th poorest across the country. My parents were former farm workers, and seeing the world through that lens and having all the opportunities that I have had really gives you a sense of, how do I make it better for others? How do I make sure that that story is true for anyone, everyone, wherever they are? And the place that I have seen the most ability to make change at scale is really government. And I also fell in love with my first public sector job as a teacher back in my hometown. And so both the marrying of the passion I have for giving back, along with the desire to truly make an impact, that really is where it crosses a lot of the different roles I've had. And so when people sort of look at the different track records, it's like, how did you go from, financial services or being a teacher to then working in the city of San Jose? And for me, the question's always been at each of those junctures is, how do I use the skills and experience that I have, both professional and career experience as well as lived experience, to be able to make the biggest impact in places or spaces that are really moving in a direction that are changing the nature of our country or the nature of our economy. And so that's how you end up getting a puzzle piece of different times and different things that I've done, but usually at times where things are really moving, whether it was in the financial industry. And in the late 90s, I think I could pick anything and the stocks are really good, had nothing to do with my talent, but realized like that was really what was going on at the time. When I was on the Hill for a decade, it was the most productive time within our country's history, where you did see not only the Great Recession, but the Affordable Care Act, there a ton of different new pieces of legislation and alternative energy, et cetera. And now I find myself in the tech sphere, where coming into a pandemic, the need for delivery, the need for technology, the need for a strong social safety net are really things that we're all talking about these days. So it's been a journey, but I'm truly excited to be able to be here with you and talk about those different aspects.
Good, Min, and we were talking about this just before we started, that, at a business school, we tend to talk about technology in the private sector. We talk about the use of AI in the automotive industry and financial services, et cetera. We tend not to talk about technology in the public sector as much. Can you kind of get us level set about what the public sector environment looks like, the gap in the use of technology between the private and the public sector, and how we need to think about that?
Yeah. So it's always, we think about government in these big buildings and marble buildings and what they stand for. And what it hasn't done yet, what government in and of itself has yet to do, is really upgrade to the tech industry in general, the tech tools that are out there. And in some ways, it's taken some time to really catch up. And you've seen this over the course of our history in America in different industries, where the industry actually moves faster than government does. I would say the same is true here, not only in terms of how do you have the right kind of infrastructure to foster an industry, how do you make sure there are the appropriate, whether it's guardrails or whether it's incentives, how do you make sure that there are that, but also how do you as yourself, as a government, adopt what is good about technology and how it can actually foster, whether that's more efficiency or access or a new way to really connect with new environments, new communities today, or the way people just interact today. Mm-hmm. And that's the piece for me that is really ever present in all aspects throughout my career, has been, when I first entered, it was, how do we make sure there are certain business processes within government? That's morphed into, how do we make sure that we're using the most modern technology? I still remember going into Department of Justice, and the Attorney General said, we really want to make sure we're attracting young, new talent, bringing in different perspectives and new ideas. And so I go and I talk to the HR team, and the HR team's like, we just don't get them. Right. And I was like, okay, so let's walk through the journey mapping of the process. Right. Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, when we get the envelopes, and I was like, wait a second, the only way we're getting resumes is through envelopes. Right. And it's an immediate understanding that, wow, we do really have an opportunity to update our systems so that you're getting online. And now there's a ton of different options for California Department of Justice. But just that little window into it gives you a sense that whether it's legacy systems or legacy processes, there's a whole opportunity here that we really need to upgrade what is happening within our government and really utilize technology in a positive way, where you can really advance the mission of what a lot of our different agencies have, both at the state and federal level and even in local cities.
Yeah. Amanda, do you get dismayed and discouraged by the magnitude of challenge in adoption and improvement? Or do you say, no, this market is huge and that chance for impact is great? Where do you kind of fall on all that?
I think over the course of my career, people have always said, but government is so slow, right? Like, how do you possibly? government is slow until it's not. The truth is, when there is a real effort to move change forward, it does actually happen quite fast. I believe what has happened during the course of the pandemic, really surfacing not only the safety net issues, not only folks, what do people do when they are searching for a job or things like that no one ever used to really think about in terms of the safety net, but also how do you do it? And the idea that for a lot of these programs required in person, or for that matter, a federal employee or state employee, government employee, the idea of working from home was like unheard of, absurd. How will it ever work? And in very short order, over the course, over the year plus, everyone had to do it differently, including our government systems. And so perhaps if you would ask me this question 2 years ago, I might have a different answer. But today, right now, at a time when people are really doing so many things differently, government too has really changed its process and opened up new ways of doing it. And certainly I could say over the last year, when the crisis was deepest, there was a level of openness and collaboration and just let's fix this problem that I've never seen over the course of my career in public service. So I think we're at a unique moment for that question. And I am super hopeful about what changes we can make right now. Mm-hmm. I'm also really realistic that once changes are made, they do get stuck in bureaucracies. Mm-hmm. And so that's why right now it's really important, because I also recognize that windows do close.
Interesting. So on that topic then, Amanda, take us through the milestones in your own mind about Code for America. What should happen short-term, intermediate term, and then long-term vision? What would success look like ultimately?
Yeah. So in order to give you a little bit of the short-term, part of it is really understanding the last year that we've been through, which is, we were in the process, as many folks in the tech industry, everything's a pilot first, right? And you're piloting and you're trying to figure it out and you're iterating. How do we reach people in very short order? And I'll give a good example on Get Your Refund, which is our earned income tax credit tool, free mobile app. We were piloting. How do we get to people? How do we get to communities that have often been left out? How do we get to multilingual communities? And we were piloting it. Pandemic hits, and all of a sudden the IRS has these VITA sites, right? These volunteer sites all around the country that are mostly in person. And all of a sudden they said, how do we get them online? How do we have training? What can we do? So in very short order, we launched our mobile app, not as a pilot, but much larger than that. Ended up also building in all of our volunteer network to really help people through a process that some folks were only used to in person. Some trainers only used to in person. And we launched it to be able to reach as many people as we possibly could. Mm-hmm. Now we are at a place where we have seen what is possible. We have seen what kind of relationships can come together to really get to folks, to really do the kind of outreach you need. And now we are setting the stage to how do we do this as a matter of practice? Not simply because of a crisis, but how do you take the lessons we just learned? How do you take the relationships we just learned and set that in place so that people shouldn't have to go in, so that people can do it in a much more efficient, effective, and data-driven way? And that part is really what Code for America is focused on in 3 different areas. One, the safety net. So when you think about that, you think of a lot of the child poverty programs that the president is talking about, WIC, TANF, food stamps, Medicaid. How are all of those linked and integrated? The tax benefit side, right? In something like 30 plus countries, you actually get a check in the mail, or you get a letter in the mail and say, is this right? Do you want a direct deposit, or here's your check? Tell us what you want. I mean, you can imagine that kind of interaction on the tax benefit side, and now the child tax credit portal. And then the third piece is we're still doing our work in the criminal justice world on automatic record clearance, where Michigan just passed the most expansive automatic record clearance bill that we've seen in the country. And now that is about implementation. And so our idea is we should be transforming these systems now to actually be of the digital age in a way that really is centering around the people it serves, not necessarily the bureaucracy or the paperwork or even the building, but the people it serves with what we call human-centered design.
Good. So Amanda, when you have to think about kind of the mental map of what you're going to go choose to do, how do you think about it? Are you looking at the magnitude of problem? Are you looking at the maturity of the technology? Are you looking at buy-in from consumers? How do you think about all that?
Some of this is the history of Code for America, which was really embedded in this idea of where is there a market failure? And in many cases, those are where you will find low-income programs. And so Code for America very early on recognized that people who were applying to food stamps, the uptake was incredibly lower. The gap, right, was incredibly high, 30%, 40%. People were not able to get food stamps, even though it was supposed to be accessible, supposed to be easy to do. So what's going on? Mm-hmm. And that process really did lead us to take a view into what is happening with low-income programs around the country and how can we use our unique experience to really bridge that gap with government low-income programs. Sometimes it's community-based organizations. Sometimes it's vendors to say you are missing these folks because your question is leaving them, right? 73% bounce off at your first question. So how about let's change that? And so it really is bringing a mindset that you see often in the private sector, often in technology, and saying, how do you now put it in places where, for the most part, we don't necessarily have a competitive market or anyone at all?
Mm-hmm. And when you go through the different technologies, like a lot today, obviously we talk about data and AI. You talked about mobile apps, and obviously there's cloud computing and Internet of Things. How big is like data and AI, and what are the other technologies that you say are just fundamental to what you're trying to get done? So
all of it is incredibly important, but we are at a basic level when you're talking about government. You really are first just trying to data match. I mean, as an example, when the pandemic hit and schools were closed, we had a bunch of kids on school lunch programs. As states started to try and put together a plan of how to get resources, it was quickly identified that social services had addresses and school systems had addresses, but they weren't the same, right? And when all of a sudden either one or the other went into just try and data match, it was about an average of 25%. With a couple of algorithm, different coding, et cetera, we were able to help states go from 25 to 80%. Huge difference, right? But that required not only these two different departments speaking together, but that also required some policies to help us share data. Mm-hmm. And so how important is it? Well, it's everything to be able to have these folks work together, have these systems work together. Here's what I'll say, though, in general about technology that I think we need to be really careful about. Everyone always talks about technology as, if you just put it in there, that'd be great. If you are dealing with a system that is inequitable, bringing in technology will just make that more inequitable, faster, and more efficiently. Mm-hmm. And so it is really important to take a step back and look at some of these programs, particularly programs that have left certain communities out, and say, what is it about the system that is doing it in and of itself? Because before we layer on technology and before we layer on AI, how do we get that right? Mm-hmm. And that part to me is not only the window of opportunity now, but before it gets too far down the road where it's automatic that you are seeing some people and not seeing others. We have to intentionally really broaden the view and broaden the way we think about system outcomes.
So if you were to give me an example of that, you were talking about a mobile app a minute ago, and I assume the premise is people all have smartphones. Yep. Is that an example that, wait a minute, there's a whole bunch of people that may not have a smaartphone or not use a mobile app for XYZ, sure, and thus you've not been able to reach them? Would that be an example?
Yeah, let's say to use that exact example, let's say you were going to do a stimulus and it was just going to go to folks who have broadband and a computer at home with an application with an internet streaming service that doesn't time out in 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. You're probably not reaching the lowest income folks, the most marginalized folks, because they don't even have technology. They don't even have a desktop computer at home. Yep. And that's what I mean, is then it requires you to really think about the system and say, wait a second, we are delivering X thing in this way. Who are we leaving out before we make that system more efficient, right? Or put more money into that same funnel.
Yeah. So can Code for America deal with those issues, or those are much broader issues that Congress has to deal with, or, some branch of federal government?
But they're not, right? I mean, in this sense, which, well, I'll say it in this way. If, and we see it across the country, if elected officials, administrative officials say, I want to make sure that I am just looking at who I'm serving and who I'm not. If I am not reaching communities with disabilities in our tax forms, what are we doing wrong? Right? So if you have that data, then you can actually start to address it. Right? And some of this stuff is not hard. Folks with disabilities don't use green. Right? Green is a problem on the screen for some communities. So it's no surprise that when all of a sudden you look at the data, but at least if you have the data on the back end, you're able to ask the question and then walk through the process and say, what is the barrier here? Right? For folks, another example is asking someone for hourly wages, what is your salary? I don't know, but I know I make $20 an hour. Right? Those kinds of questions really trip people up, and you begin to say, well, it's no surprise. Why are we not reaching hourly workers, but we are reaching folks who can who have a salary? Those are the kinds of questions that we really do tackle, that are easy to see when you're actually using data-driven metrics behind the back end of applications.
Excellent. Very, very helpful. Let me ask you the next question. We talk a lot in technology about all the good uses of technology, but we talk more and more about the tech lash, and we cover it in my class and other places. Do you have your own variant of the tech lash in what you do? So as an example, when you're automating a process of delivery of anything, eliminating jobs, which creates a future of work issue. You talk about sharing data between agencies. Is there a data privacy issue that gets breached? Do you have your own tech lash issues that you have to worry about excessively, or not really?
We don't really. If anything, for us, what we are doing, we have a fellowship program. So we are bringing in new and different voices. If anything, I would say we're adding. So in the state of Louisiana, one of the things they were working on is how do they understand what folks are feeling when they do these programs? How do they know it's actually working? And so they actually put together a client success team. We created more jobs in terms of the tech world, where they created a client success team. They created the minute the pandemic hit, we had worked with them on building notifications. And so they had to build a team in order to be able to keep up with notifications. And so in some ways, you can look at this as we are creating new and different roles that, instead of sitting at the front desk, you're able to now proactively, you're able to actually have folks come to you because government is proactively reaching out. So we don't get a lot of that. We also actively think about the fact that in government, the high number of retirements in every single state government and federal government, et cetera, means that there's quite a few openings that are coming on the scene in short order. And we're seeing that now in real time. The pandemic has actually pushed some of that, fast forward some of that. So all of you who are watching, we expect that there will be more openings as retirements come through. And that's a real opportunity to push a way of thinking differently, a way of doing things, and almost forced to. So we haven't received that backlash. In terms of privacy, this is a really important one for us in a couple of different ways, because we do want to share data so that we can help you get the full benefits that you are owed, right? So on the one hand, we're like, no, just help us share. We try our best to be really communicative about how we're sharing it and where we're sharing it. And by the way, when it's time to get rid of it. And we talk about that explicitly with our partners, particularly when we partner with community-based organizations, how important that is to share that kind of information, which is, here's what we're using it for, here is why, and this is not what we are doing with your data.
Yep. Excellent. Excellent. Tell me on the barriers to adoption. What are the biggest challenges in getting all this done? Is it adoption, partners you have with government? Is it recruiting talent? Is it something else?
Gosh, it is layered. And I wish there was one thing I could name. And what we learn over and over again is the layers of changing a mindset, changing a major system to do it differently. And so it's a little bit of all of them. first of all, I'll just start off with just a mindset. There is a reality that technology is a little bit scary. Mm-hmm. And is it going to make sure that the system works better, or is it going to make it harder? All those different questions that a lot of government folks have, especially because there is this sentiment that government should work perfectly 100% of the time, right? And the idea of technology, even as we try and teach it within government or with our partners, is we try and say, no, it's iterative. I don't have exactly the right answer right now. And that's a really scary proposition for folks who one mistake and it's really scary, right? So some of this is a mindset shift of being willing to sort of try it out. Having a public who is willing to allow for that to happen. So that's a piece of it. The other piece of it is you're exactly right. Tech talent is hard. There aren't even the classifications in many cases for some of the folks, like I was just mentioning, client success, right? Or data science, right? Some of these are new classifications within the federal systems, within the state systems. And so it is really building, well, how and where does it work? And I think technology, for the most part, has entered our government system as the help desk. And that has actually harmed our ability to think about technology as a programmatic person at the table, not just help, but really thinking about, all right, we have this program. How are they at the table of policy in terms of how to deliver it so that the through thread is all the way from the beginning of the policy all the way to outcomes, and the feedback loop is there as well. Mm-hmm. That's not normal. I mean, I am finding us sitting at tables now where we're talking about the Farm Bill. I'm not sure a tech organization, a tech nonprofit has ever been invited to those kinds of tables, but we are now. And largely, I think the pandemic will have pushed that forward even more. So again, the speed with which I think we will see tech talent rise within the administration, not only this administration, but going forward in cities and states who have recognized the need for doing things digitally, I think we will see a heck of a lot more openings like that. And what I'm hoping for is that we have the talent there to meet that moment.
Excellent. Excellent. Let me ask you a couple last questions, and then there's a huge number of questions that come in on Slido. So first question is, give us the longer term vision here. If everything that you're doing and other similar organizations, if there are such, plays out well, what would the future state look like?
We would all feel pretty proud of the government we created. Not only is it cool and efficient and moving in a new direction, I think this idea that I'd say probably over the course of my lifetime that a lot of folks, particularly when I went to business school, a lot of folks thought about government as this thing that was like, get out of the way. Let us just do our thing. You're bothering us, right? And instead, if we all, government, business, nonprofit, looked at it and say, how can we be all a team and get us to a new level as a country? That to me means we've done something pretty remarkable, not only within government itself, but within the broader ecosystem that really does drive a nation. And I think that's our calling today, is how do all of these different industries, and if there's anything that has really made this even more real, is all of us going through a pandemic, recognizing the interdependence we all have.
Amanda, when you see the divisiveness in the country, and a lot of people will say it's because the nation's become so highly partisan, is your message here that actually technology and efficiency of government can help mitigate some of the policy differences, the political differences that exist out there?
I do. I got asked this question, like, okay, so what happens like in this, like, why does Code for America have any influence on that? How does it have any influence on that? And I think about the idea that, you're fighting with your partner at home and you're mad and right? Or like and you get up and they leave, you leave, and you get up and you're on the street and you get to a stop sign, right? And there's a stop sign there, and you don't crash into each other, even though you might want to. You don't, because the stop sign is there for both of you, and then someone has to go first. It just works, right? And that allows for you basically not to have those major crashes. But I feel the same way about our government systems today. I know it's not a stop sign, but if things just worked, that is where you start to develop trust, where we do begin to have an environment where you can actually talk about things, where you have a positive environment to say, hey, I have a government that does work. I think there's nothing more harmful than a system, not only that people don't believe in or that are skeptical of, but then on top of that, that either doesn't work or is unfair, or worse, it actually harms people. And I think when you go through that layering and you ask yourself, what kind of government do we have today? I think it's fair to say in each of those categories, we probably haven't done nearly as well as we should, thinking about us as a country, thinking about what our potential is as America.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Let me start taking the questions because, again, there's so many of them. I don't want to, miss a chance to ask these. First question from Liz and a bunch of other people who upvoted it. How should government interact with marginalized communities to capture better data despite distrust due to racism, colonialism, et cetera, et cetera?
So we deal with this in real time because we're trying to get food assistance, et cetera, out to folks. And there's a couple of different things we do. Number one is we work with community-based organizations that are trusted. So we don't necessarily put our Code for America name on it. We actually work with who is the church, who is the community, where are they, and how do we make sure that we are empowering trusted organizations to be there. The example of that is we did the disaster relief for immigrants that Governor Newsom put together. We stood that up in 35 days, and it wasn't Code for America. We actually worked with community-based organizations and churches, et cetera, all around the state in order to get the resources out to communities. I think it's also important as we look at whatever product we are in. It's very different for technology to show up as a school. And it's very different for technology to show up as a tax, as the IRS. And it's very different to show up as a criminal justice system. So from all of those different views, when we think about delivery, that is at the very center of it, which is what is the trust relationship? What is the most trusted relationship in this process? And then from that point, making sure that we are holding that relationship with kid gloves and taking care of people all the way through the process. It is why we talk about our products as really servicing people with dignity and respect, because it's not just the first call in that says, hey, I want to file this tax refund, but it's, are you there to help them all the way through the process to when their form is submitted?
Great. Another question, and it's getting into how you actually make a lot of this happen. Can you share how you even began the conversation with the California Department of Social Services to pitch a digital tool like Get Cal Fresh?
Yeah, so each of our products really took a different tactic, and it was kind of the nature of where Code for America was, but what the opening was in general. So for Get Cal Fresh, we actually worked directly with community-based organizations at the forefront. So we recognized that we could help with a front-end digital assister and then be able to provide those forms to counties. And all of a sudden we were able to iterate, get better and better at it, help community-based organizations get better at navigating their communities into the system. So that was one approach to all of a sudden the state of California saying, wait a second, you're doing something that's working, right? You help, this county went from 30% uptake to 70% uptake. What did you do and how did you do it? That's one approach. Another approach that we've had is with Get Your Refund. We were out there, we sort of were sharing what we were learning, and then you have a crisis where someone says, can anyone help provider programs, right? And we say, we think we can, right? And so that was an immediate partnership from the beginning with VitaSites. With automatic record clearance, we heard District Attorney Gascon talk about the fact that the cannabis laws have changed. Now what? What are we going to do? And how do we, so we worked with his office to say, let's pilot it. Let's see what we can do to sort of help this process go and move faster through the use of technology. So there's been a lot of different avenues. I'd say at our current juncture, because we've had so many relationships now across the country during the pandemic, et cetera, it's much more now meeting states where they are and saying, you know what, we Code for America would really like to make a dent in the safety net. Where do we go around and say, okay, who's in it with us? How do we build a cohort and really train with you? So it's much more of a partnership now than I think it was when we first started. On the other hand, CBOs love to come to us and say, hey, can you help us with this tool? And so we could push this issue or that issue. And certainly our brigade network is out there working hand in glove with a lot of the community-based organizations to get what they need, whether it's mutual aid, whether it's, a relationship with the local government. But yeah, we've tried a lot of different avenues. And part of, I think, the specialness that we bring to this space is the ability to remain flexible so that we can meet, whether it's, government or people where they are. We try and really embody that idea.
Good. And related question comes from CO and a variety of others is, tell us some of the most successful stakeholder relationships you've had and what makes them unique? How did you develop them, et cetera?
Yeah, the most successful relationships have been really in our the administrative officials. So a lot of your secretaries of HHS or the person on the ground who is running the program, right? Or I'd also say some of the most helpful folks have been caseworkers. You ask any caseworker in government, why are we not getting out more resources? They could easily, they don't need data to tell you. They have the pile of papers and they will say, because you're asking for this, or because policy requires that, or because our hours are from 9 to 5 and the folks that we're trying to serve have jobs until 8 p.m., right? They will tell you because they live it and they see it every day. And so that entire string of relationships are incredibly important to us, and we hold them tightly because they are how we learn. But they're also, we see those kinds of ideas and those kinds of barriers over and over again. And so to be able to go, did we listen careful enough the first time so we got to a solution soon enough so we can share it? But really, I would say the best relationships are the folks who have the staying power to say, we're going to figure this out together. Because it's not easy to navigate it, right? You bring down one barrier and all of a sudden question 2 was good, but question 10, man, we lost 80% on that one, right? And so that's been what's been so interesting about this work is it is navigating those barriers and the relationships together in a partnership.
Excellent. Excellent. Next question is on cybersecurity. How should tech companies engage with the government in developing a framework for dealing with cybersecurity issues in the face of the Colonial Pipeline hack, which just occurred in the last week?
Yeah. So when I was on the Hill, we were talking about a cybersecurity bill. And I know there's been some that have passed, or there's been one major one that has passed, but there needs to be a whole heck of a lot more work, frankly, in cybersecurity and bringing the best minds together. I actually think not only our federal government needs to get around the table, and there is a bipartisan bill right now in the Senate, but not only get around the table and talk through what do we do now, but I think every single state government should also be having those same kinds of conversations. This is something that keeps me up at night. I worry, not for Code for America per se, but for our government in general, and really thinking about who are the minds out there that are on top of this stuff and what have we learned from them. I also do wonder, I do believe this is a private-public partnership effort. I think the private sector is usually far ahead in every industry on cybersecurity more than our agencies, largely because of the legacy systems we're in. But that's a piece of it, is getting the private sector, what are the lessons you've learned and how do we actually share in those? But it is something that keeps me up at night, for sure.
Good. Ryan asks, what do you think it'll take to bridge the gap between government and tech? Legislators often don't seem to understand the tech they're responsible for regulating. And gosh, there's a million examples now today of that. What's your view on that? Yeah,
I remember being in the Senate when I heard that it was a bunch of tubes. I remember the staff conversations around that, what was that? There's a couple of answers I have to this. It is true. Government is pretty far behind in this. it's also true that it is healthy to have younger folks in office now, on the other side of the dais, not just testifying, but it's really, really important that we do have folks with diverse experience running for office and in these offices. I'll also say, it used to be that offices didn't have a social media person, right? They evolve over time, but they evolve slower. And so I am hopeful in seeing at least this last relief bill have a pretty big, broad section of modernization in a way that I have yet to see out of any federal bill. So not only was there tech capabilities overall, but there was tech capabilities within the program areas. Once we start walking down that path, where tech is really embedded a lot more in all of these programs, we will begin to see that conversation surface and understand it on a much deeper level in terms of policy as well. But you are right, we are woefully behind. And I'll say two things. It was true in the financial industry as well. It took time for government to really come to grips with how should it think about it. The issue with tech is it's moving so dang fast. And so I'll also say, I think there are some lessons here in NIH in the way certain agencies actually deal with technology, how they both foster it and how they both take care of it in a responsible, balanced way. And so we've got to draw some of those lessons.
Good. Amanda, what would be the reverse of this? How do business people, tech people, et cetera, better work with regulators, elected officials, et cetera? It would combat the kind of view that businesses and tech people can be viewed as patronizing. They can be viewed as kind of, you're from, California and you're lecturing the rest of the nation, blah, blah, blah. What is your advice there?
So, I think part of, Code for America will talk about this a lot, that at the beginning, part of the resistance to technology and government was a lot of tech folks, a lot of Silicon Valley people would show up and be like, let me show you how this is done. Yeah. Right. So some of it is just a mindset change that government in and of itself is a unique entity with a unique mission, and having a true mutual respect for that is really, I think is number one. Number two is, I said it earlier, is this idea that I remember hearing in my business school class, government just needs to get out of the way. We can't talk like that. We can't talk like that. We can't think like that. We can't be like that. If there's anything that we've learned in the pandemic, you need a government to work. Now, once we get beyond that mindset, I think there's an honest reality that there's a lot of just upgrading that government needs to do. And we are all better for when they do it. And that part, I think we are just scratching the surface of how we start bringing folks together to work on that. It's happened more on the defense side, more in intelligence and government, and a heck of a lot less on the domestic side. And so there is a path to where you have seen it work to some degree. So how do we build on those models? But I'll also say this, which is, I was on a call not too long ago with a private sector company that was doing background checks, right? And I was talking about, we've got to get automatic record clearance because, listen, the cannabis law has changed, and yet people are being held back from jobs from an old rule because they have to actually go to court in order to take a record off. It should just be like your credit report. Right? You paid that bill, it's now gone, and it doesn't show up on your credit report. We can do that. And it was interesting because afterwards, again, a private sector guy, well-respected and doing background checks, afterwards said, we should talk because I agree with you. I agree with that value. I agree with how we do that. How can I help you? And I think there are these moments where it is better, as he said, even on the call that we were on, it is better for the product he has to have a cleaner background check of, cleaner data. And instead, what he has to do is he has to go in and go, okay, what convictions, this one matters, this one doesn't. And so, it was, for me, how many conversations I've had like that, they are actually more than I would have anticipated coming into this space. And so we just need to talk more and come together more and find those areas where we can say, let's do it together. Right.
Excellent. Another question, it's a couple of them I'm going to combine here about kind of go to market in essence. Inside Code for America, how do you decide on make versus buy? So what are you going to do yourself versus, and same thing for government. Government seems to insource a lot is the question. And how do you think about where they're going to really outsource or not?
It's a very, very, very good question, and a very, very, very hard question. And here's the reason why is government, and it's one of the barriers to new technology, is government. It has some very big vendor contracts that you can't move. And a lot of vendors build customized to a state so that it's not scalable. The pandemic again gave us a new window where for the first time, at least in safety net benefits, for the first time, we had multiple states on with a vendor to say, and because the work we do and the technology experience that our team has was able to say, but you do that in that state and you do that in that state. Why can't you just do it in that state? Right. And, for the pandemic, vendors were willing to move that. What I hope is that becomes a matter of practice. Right. And if more companies had an initiative to say, we know we need to do some things differently, how do we start to actually just layer that in? And so it does matter when you have a, national goal of whether it's equitable outcomes, or you have a national goal of reducing child poverty, and not just an administration goal, but like a national goal where we all embody it, not only nonprofits, but businesses and governments. Then we have something, because it's very much in that same vein of what we got to see during a pandemic. If we use that same sort of common purpose, common goal, I think you can break through some of these very stuck vendor relationships or stuck systems change that can happen.
Excellent. Let me ask you a last question, and I'm going to do a wrap up here. Alex and a couple others asked, what was the most challenging and rewarding experience as part of your run for a congressional seat and also for governor in 2018?
It's not often you get to sort of be reflective of our government. The folks that it sees, the folks that it doesn't see. It was a true rude awakening for me, having gone from my small town, then to Stanford and Harvard, and to come back and knock on doors and recognize that people just didn't believe that was possible anymore. Mm-hmm. It was a real rude awakening for me. And really, I owned my own privilege at that moment, recognizing that just because I walked it didn't mean others, and that it's an intentional effort to make sure it happens for others, and not to lose sight of that. And so on the one hand, I know that's like a heavy learning, but I think helped me be a better person, a better public servant, to really understand that truth. And there really is just something beautiful about going around the places you grew up and saying hi. I mean, just that, like hi, and trying to inject hope and trying to inject a vision that, particularly where I'm from, that a vision of empowerment that folks could have. That has always been incredibly rewarding. And then I do have to say, for most of my career, I've been, whether it's the only woman or the only person of color, or many times both, it was really meaningful for me to see people see themselves in me and being able to say, I could do that because she could do that. Having walked so many paths and realizing, like, where do I ask? How do you do this? How do you say this? As me, as a woman of color, it's different. And so I was, it felt really rewarding to try and help at least pave an outline for somebody else, to know that they will walk it, and hopefully it'll be a little easier.
Yeah, great messages. Great messages. Amanda, let me take a shot at summarizing what my takeaways were, as I try and do, and let you upgrade them or share any parting comments you've got. I've got 6 takeaways, primary takeaways I got. And it's interesting. They're a mixture of kind of your personal inspirations in life with kind of the hardcore leadership, market assessment, et cetera. So the first takeaway that I got is to acknowledge where are the needs greatest. And these can be personal influences and where we grew up, et cetera, against what should be happening in that environment. That's kind of the first takeaway I got. Second one I got is what you talked about kind of the timing and environment we live in now with the pandemic. And let there be hope out of that when you said government is slow until it's not, and that the pandemic has allowed new things to happen that haven't been happening before. And remember that and take advantage of that in many cases. Third area, and it sounded almost like a business advice here, but identify where there's a market failure. Where is a community not being served? We would call it the use case or the value proposition or whatever, but identify a market failure and let that guide how you're going after things. The next message I got is this idea about our view about government, that we should feel proud of our government. And if we aren't, what actions are we taking to feel proud about our government? And your message is Code for America can create a lot of advances, notwithstanding a lot of the divide that exists. Fifth message, and again, similar to almost in a business environment, but the importance of working with trusted organizations. Is if you're going to partner with somebody, are they representing you well? Are they somebody that are going to get things done? And in your case here, it isn't always the governmental agency. It may be a community-based organization, not the government itself. And then the final message is this message to business people, which obviously we're at a business school, but we need mutual respect between government and business. It's easy to kind of take what might have been the early disruptors in tech, which is, get out of my way and I know best, et cetera. That may have worked early on when you're creating new stuff, but it's run it past its shelf life. And we need to have mutual respect like you'd have in a relationship, and that will create better outcomes. Those are the takeaways I have. Upgrades on that or parting thoughts or both?
That's great. I feel like I'm in class.
That's exactly.
I just wrote a paper. Wait, did I do that? Oh, that's great. The one piece I would add is the unique moment we are all in for change right now, and that particularly government is in, because it was the least likely to change as much as it is right now, today, what we are seeing. So that piece is real. And I sort of feel like we're seeing it everywhere. And our expectations of government as well are in flux at the moment. And I think all of that really does present a really cool and interesting opportunity. So I think that's
Excellent.
The only one I'd add.
Yeah, perfect. Amanda, let me just say a huge thank you. Number one, as I mentioned at the outset, this whole exposure to the public sector and communities, we don't spend enough time on it. We tend to be focused on enterprises and, startups, et cetera. And that's been super helpful. The second thing, just to comment, is your enthusiasm and belief in good things happening. My guess is your area is pretty difficult in getting change, and yet you've got an intrinsic feeling of hope and optimism, and this can be done. And I think that's just a great trait and a great message for all of us. So just a big, big thank you. And I hope we can have you back again very, very soon.
Of course, in person, perhaps.
Yes, we're hoping for the fall.
All right. Well, take care, and thank you for inviting me. I do hope everyone out there does really think about public service, because government is what we make it to be.
Very well said. We got a great group of talented students that would make a big impact. So big thank you and good messages. Have a great evening.
Take care.